What is going on? We're back at it again with another episode of True Capacity Talks. And this segment is Combos with Dr. Andy with your guy, Dr. Andrew Muldermans. Now, today we're going to talk about 3 different training stimuli and where you would use it, why you would use it, who predominantly uses it right now, even if you don't realize what you're doing, and why it's important to understand what you're using and compare that with the goal you're trying to hit. So, Andy, could you go ahead and break us down with the 3 most common training stimuli and what they actually mean?
Yeah, I would say for these training stimuli, predominantly, they're going to be with lifting weights for the most part. So, we're not really going to touch on too much, I would say, monostructural, cardiovascular style training. But so the 3 that we want to kind of talk about today is the first one is absolute strength. Second one is called myotropic hypertrophy, and then or myofibular, right? For those of you guys that have heard those terms. And then the last one is sarcoplasmic hypertrophy as well. So, James, before we kind of go further, I'll break those down into like layman's terms. So, absolute strength, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's literally how much you can move in relation to, well, not relation to your body, but it's how much weight you can move. So myotropic or myofibular hypertrophy. So if you break those words down, it just literally means muscle growth. Okay. So you can think of like size here. Okay. And then sarcoplasmic.
Is that like Arnold? We're talking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like that kind of?
Yeah.
Ronnie Coleman, like just Jay Cutler, massive.
Yeah, that's That's where you're gonna. Whenever you say Jay Cutler, I always think of the old Chicago Bears and Denver quarterback, even though that's not the case.
Completely different body type.
That's where my mind goes. I don't know. It must be Sunday. So, and then sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is where you get a little bit of growth, right, with the muscle size, but it's predominantly, you can think of like endurance. So high repetitions, that kind of stuff.
Okay. So those are pretty much the 3 when we're talking about, outside of monostructural cardiovascular work. We're talking about those. Now, you have all of those 3. What people outside of, like, so we know that, hey, maybe, traditional NPC bodybuilding, men's physique is kind of that middle ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the sarcoplasmic and not absolute strength, or right in the middle. What would be an example of the other 2, though, that people would commonly be able to see, like, oh, that makes sense?
Oh, the 2 on the 2 polar ones. So like absolute strength and sarcoplasmic.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll frame it this way. And then maybe you can come up with a better examples.
Mm-hmm.
But like, so absolute strength is, you need to stay within the rep ranges of 1 to 3, maybe touching on 4. Okay. 4 reps in a set. And then myotropic hypertrophy, again, is going to be within that 4 to 8, maybe even 10 range. And then sarcoplasmic is going to be 10 to 12 and beyond. So, for those of you guys out there that just want to do simple math, right? Again, absolute strength, 1 to 3. I'm going to put like hard boundaries on these just for the case of the example. Absolute strength, 1 to 3 reps. Myotropic hypertrophy, 4 to 10. And then sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is going to be 10 to 12 and beyond as far as reps.
Got it. Okay. So then that brings me to this. Absolute strength sounds similar to how a lot of Olympic weightlifting, like traditionally, like competitive Olympic weightlifting is run, where you're doing singles, you're doing doubles, you're doing triples, you're doing a complex with no more than 3, like 1 by like 3 positions, but one rep each. And then also something else that comes to mind is powerlifting, right? You've got 3 to 5 minutes in between rest periods, but you're pulling like 80% for 10 by 1, right? 10 sets of 1 single at like 85%, and doing that where you're trying to be like, your weight is obviously up, but those guys definitely pound for pound, because they're trying to keep their weight down and be the strongest that they can, right? They're doing a shit ton of volume. I mean, is that accurate for that side, for absolute strength, for those 2?
Yeah, for the most part. There's different there's a lot of different ways to go about it within even that realm, right? So, and you can think of it this way: you are doing a lot of volume.
Mm-hmm.
You may not be, so like, for instance, you may not be doing 100 single or double or triple, 100 reps,
Mm-hmm.
right, accumulated, but 3 to 5, to 7, maybe even to 10 sets of say 1, 2, or 3 reps,
Mm-hmm.
because of the weight that you're moving is a lot, right? So it's higher volume for the amount of load that you're moving, versus say like if you and I just dropped down and did 100 push-ups, yes, we would get a pump, right? But we wouldn't necessarily be completely trashed.
Mm-hmm.
Versus doing like say 15, 20, 25, 30 reps at, somewhere percentage wise, like 70, 80, 90% of our 1 rep max in broken up sets of 1, 2, or 3 reps. So yeah, that's an accurate description of that as far as. And then the other thing too is it's kind of inverted with the rest, right? So like the higher weight you do, the less reps that you do, right? In accordance with the amount of weight or load, you need more rest. So if I'm going to be hitting a set of 3, right, and going to be doing 6 sets of 3, I'm going to need like 3 to 5 minutes of full recovery, right, to go back and, do that amount of volume or loading work again. Versus if I'm going to do 4 sets of 25 push-ups, right, I could probably get away with, a 1-to-1 ratio of work to rest,
Mm-hmm.
versus say like a 1-to-3.
Yeah. Which brings me to an interesting point that people don't seem to understand. And it's that if you're moving close to the absolute limit, the upper limits of what you have strength wise, if you're not taking more rest between your sets, you're doing yourself a disservice. One, your risk for injury goes through the roof because you're not recovered enough to even be pushing that weight that you could safely previously. And number two, how are you going to get quality reps if you're at close to the upper limit if you don't take ample rest in between? Like if the goal is to put on strength, right? You're like, I want to hit this number. It is absurd to be taking 30 seconds to a minute between sets of 3 or 4 or 5. That it is absurd. Absolutely absurd. But people do it all day, every day. So I guess my question here would be on the other side, right? Sarcoplasmic. Would this be like Orange Theory, most CrossFit Metcons? Would this be more similar to F45 and like our circuit style burn boot camp, that kind of training where heart rate is elevated for the majority of the time that you're actually working, the rest periods are shortened, and you're kind of consistently moving?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's essentially that's well broken down. And again, it doesn't need to be, sarcoplasmic reticular hypertrophy could be a burn boot camp, could be, a CrossFit Metcon, say like Angie, where you have to do, 4 different movements of 100 reps each for time. It could just be, hey, I'm sitting on a bench and I can just do some like traditional bicep curls for 5 sets of 12.
Yeah.
Right. Your heart rate's still going to get elevated, but you don't need to be in this, more like plyometric, heart rate for 30, 40 minutes at a time kind of thing. But yes, those are good examples.
So it's really, you can go the 5x12 all the way up to like, hey, we've got a long Metcon here, or a long chipper, and our heart rate's staying elevated and rep ranges are over 12 and might be even closer to like 60 to 70 per movement. But it's anything kind of that threshold and up is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, simplistically, yeah. If you're just doing 12 reps of something consistently and above, that you're going to start tapping into that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy realm. Yes. Yep.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about potentially. I want to throw out some examples or some goals, and I want you to reverse engineer for me what type of just conceptually. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other things that go into it, but just conceptually, what you would be doing to train that. So, I'll run through them as I'm just in the scenario. So I'm coming out of high school, right? I want to go work for the fire department. I need to pass the fitness test, which requires me to, what the fire test looks like. Requires me to do, some rope holding some hose lifting onto my shoulder, running some ladder climbing, with a tank, no mask on, but a tank in full gear. I have to get up staircases and back down, right? And then I've got to do some burnout push-ups for 1:30. And then I've also got to run a 1.5 miles. Like someone that's training for that, what area would they train the majority in? And kind of how would you construct that just from a conceptual standpoint?
Well, if I just had the 2 out of 3 that I would choose for that individual, right? Predominantly, and this is all obviously hypothetical, but I would stick with the myotropic hypertrophy as well as the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So, because obviously you're gonna have to work for an undetermined amount of time, right? So you got to be prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't want your muscles to necessarily fatigue super
Mm-hmm.
quick. Like if you can lift a shit ton of weight, right, for one rep, like let's say you can bench 400 pounds and squat, 450. I know those numbers are a little bit unrelational, but great. You can pick up a heavy hose full of water and like spray it without getting thrown, back all the way to the truck. But, can you ruck it, through, I used to be a wildland fighter, so I'm kind of going into that mindset versus structure. But can you go ruck out into the wilderness up unknown terrain at however steep of a level to maybe go rescue somebody or just, dig line for hours on end? I can tell you that a 1 rep max bench press probably isn't going to, benefit you that much, right?
Didn't
Outside of
help
just,
you out there.
no, I never could bench that much anyway. But, you know, not to say that it wouldn't, benefit you to have, but you also need to be training that myotropic and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy a little bit more so.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like a schematic, what that workout would look like, I can't necessarily
Yeah, yeah.
give,
Don't need that. I'm
but
just more talking
but
like buckets, you know?
yeah, I would predominantly do for that person. You could probably be really good with myotropic hypertrophy, and then like you said, they have to run
Mhm.
for that PT test. Just get outside and run, right? That's probably going to cover for the most part your sarcoplasmic. So
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. So now in a different scenario, I'm a warehouse worker, right? In a shipping facility or receiving facility, and I'm doing a lot of things with my hands. Sometimes, seasonally, I'm working with, because I work for UPS, I'm out on a truck running boxes, right? From the truck to the house, scanning them, back on the truck and continuing to move. What buckets would you dip into for that?
the myotropic hypertrophy would be the one. So that 4 to 8, 4 to 10 range. And then, coincidentally, I work with a lot of patients that come in,
Mm-hmm.
do that style work.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot of them go to the gym and they do a lot of like, absolute strength work without even knowing it. So I would say they could tend to, be successful with those two. I would say,
Absolute strength and myotropic.
thank you. Yeah. Yep. Those two.
Okay. And then, hey man, how about someone that, like, I want to be like Hunter McIntyre, right? I want to do OCRs. I want to go to high rocks. I want to do, and for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's obstacle course racing, like kind of what I would say is like CrossFit minus all the technical work, right? And minus heavy, heavy, heavy loads overhead, right? They drop down into like odd objects and they do heavy sled pushes, but it's not anywhere close to like games level weights or
Mhm.
volume. For someone that's trying to maybe not win it, but just wants to get better at that odd object obstacle course racing, where would you pocket people for that?
Uh, I mean, I'd probably pocket them further towards like the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, so the higher rep range,
Mm-hmm.
and occasionally on like your larger muscle groups, stick more to when I say larger muscle groups, like you know larger muscles like your lats and your
Mm-hmm.
your your pecs, right, your quads, that kind of stuff. Well, quads are a little bit different, but your large strong muscles more to the myotropic hypertrophy realm. Because then we can get into, we're not going to do this, but maybe in another episode, dive into like, the different muscles, how they respond to like different tempos and
Mm-hmm.
even different rep ranges themselves. But for the most part, yeah, for obstacle course racing, like that kind of more uh, non-gym functional, like life functional, odd movements. Yeah, more of that kind of style stuff would be more like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Two more. One,
Uh,
someone is already in the military, already in special operations, and gets deployed, right, away from large units in a team of 6 to 12, right? Wants to get better at rucking, right? Usually has to carry on their back with no one else around between 30 and 85 pounds for undetermined amount of times, right? And you're not anywhere close to support. So you could be out there for weeks, you could be out there for a day. How does someone get better at carrying that with everything else going on?
Now, is this assuming that they're training up to be able to handle this, or they're currently in that scenario where they don't have
They're
access?
so they're in a training spin up. They
Okay.
already are a SEAL or a Green Beret or what have you. They've already passed all the training, but
Hmm.
they're prepping for deployment where they're going to
Got it.
have to be doing this.
Got
And
it.
the training that you would prescribe or the types of training that you would drop them into the buckets of for prepping for that, for them knowing that, hey, we could be outside the wire for a day, we could be outside the wire for 2 weeks.
Got it. Yeah, that one's a little bit trickier
Mm-hmm.
because obviously, so everyone can benefit from doing all three, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I would say for this scenario,
Mm-hmm.
gosh, it becomes a lot easier when you are like mass moves mass,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there has to be that's simple. So like if somebody can lift something, like you said, 30, 40, 50 pounds, right? They have to ruck. The bigger they are, the lighter that weight's going to seem
Mm-hmm.
on their musculoskeletal system and just system in general. So like if you could pack on, um, 10, 15, 20, whatever the number is, amount of muscle, that's only going to help you. So that myotropic hypertrophy realm is going to be good for like the size.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the absolute strength for them would be beneficial, especially like let's say deadlift, squatting,
Mm-hmm.
pressing, because that's gonna put sheer like neurological force. So like when you
Mm-hmm.
go to lift something, say that's where you can see athletes that are my size, 180 pounds, who can freaking clean 2x body weight. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But still weigh my size. And if you guys, anybody out there wants to kind of see this, just Google, Alex Smith, ALEC, and then Smith. He's a small dude who can, I think he cleaned 400 pounds or something like that.
Yeah, on
Next to,
stage next to
on,
a strongman. Yeah.
yeah, the guy from Iceland or something like that.
Wild.
Yeah, it's nuts, right? So that would be a good example of like absolute strength. So for somebody who's doing what you're kind of describing, that's what I would think. Like, yes, they need to have endurance, but you know, an even better example, I guess, would be for those of you guys that haven't heard this name before. Maybe you have Chris Spieler, who's an OG CrossFit Games athlete, right? Been around a long time. He's now retired. He now just trains and coaches at his
Mhm.
gym out in Salt Lake City. But he was like, James, you could probably correct me or whatever on this, but he was like 150,
He
maybe
was not heavy at all.
at
Like
all,
150 to
right?
160, maybe 165. Like not a big dude.
Right. So and from a CrossFit athlete, he trained a bunch of different modalities, right,
Mhm.
across all three of these things. But he was famously quoted for saying like, "Hey, I'm just not going to be able to move a 315 deadlift like somebody who weighs 225." Like it's just even though he can deadlift almost three times his body weight, he can't move it as fast as somebody that's only you know one and a quarter of their body weight.
Mhm.
So mass moves mass. So if you're going to be out there rucking, yeah, it's going to be more beneficial to put on mass, to put on absolute strength
Mhm.
to handle that. Um, so if I was them and I only had to choose two, I would
Mhm.
choose absolute strength and myotropic uh, hypertrophy, and then just play at that upper echelon of that myotropic hypertrophy, right? So like that 10
Mhm.
range. I know that's kind of
Heck
I know
yeah.
it's not exactly what you're looking for, but like that would be what my
Hey, it'll
advice would
work.
be.
Last
Yeah.
one, then I know you got a jet, so you can keep this one quick. Somebody wants to get better at Murph, where you know that you're trying to get it up under an hour. You're trying to do it not scaled. You're trying to do it RX with a vest. Someone that wants to get better at Murph, what the heck do you pocket their training into there to get them to crush it and get as close to 35 minutes as possible?
I'll okay, I'll leave this at one, sarcoplasmic.
Straight up.
So yeah, I mean I would blend it. I mean,
Mhm.
ideally I would do myotropic and sarcoplasmic. So like that 4 to 8 and then to 10 to 12
Mhm.
and beyond, right? Because if you haven't trained, you certainly should do the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, because if you don't, that's potentially how you can end up with rhabdomyolysis, right? For those of you guys that don't know, it's muscle fibers breaking down to the point where protein, myoglobin that should not be in the blood gets in the blood, goes to the kidneys, clots the kidneys, then you start peeing out Coca-Cola colored
Disgusting.
urine and you go to the hospital. It's not good. So yeah, they need to be training that higher volume
Mhm.
to be able to handle what's Murph again? It's like a mile run, 100 push
100,
pull-ups, 200
200,
push-ups.
300, a mile run. Yeah.
Yeah. So high volume in a shorter period of time, right?
You're trying to
So
get it in under an hour, and
yeah.
really the record is like sub 35.
Yeah. So I mean you're gonna have to develop volume. If you're just used to doing like, 8 strict pull-ups at a time and you're not practicing like, either because you shouldn't I don't really know anybody who would want to do Murph strict. I mean, props to those who do it strict if someone out there has done it. But like if you're just doing strict pull-ups for 4 to 6 to 8, maybe 10, and then you all of a sudden hop out and try to do like butterfly or kipping pull-ups in larger sets, not only are your joints not used to going through that forceful range of motion, let's just put that aside. Let's just say you're not used to doing that amount of volume. You could potentially leave yourself open to injury. So I would, if you had one of the three, I would highly suggest you stay on the sarcoplasmic. Yeah.
Dude, heck yeah.
I don't know why I'm pushing to the side, but like I think that's just in my brain, I'm just picturing.
Well, I think you're also in a position, and we'll wrap here, but you're in a position where you're trying not to give the everything works and all of it needs to be added, because not everyone has all the time in the world. Not everyone can even use that answer, right? If it's you and you love training, boom, you're gonna do all three. For most people, if they're like, yo, I got to pick one or two, what do I do, doc? Right. Here you go here. So I think that was a heck of a little exercise. I enjoyed it. I hope everyone listening enjoyed it. And we will see y'all next week.